Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Canada Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Research Network's webinar towards Healthy Outcomes 2.0 Framework Updates and Policy Implementations. My name is Melissa Dobson, and I'm an instructor at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and a mom of three wonderful teenagers, aged 13, 14, and 16, who all have prenatal alcohol exposure. And I'm also a member of the Family Advisory Council for CanFASD, and I couldn't be happier to be here to introduce our speakers today. As an land acknowledgement, land acknowledgement is an important step in reconciliation of the treaty traditional territory lands and recognizing the people of the territory. The Canada FASD Research Network recognizes the historical significance and contributions of Indigenous people and their cultures and understands the important role that Indigenous community plays today and in the future. We acknowledge that we live, work, and meet on traditional territories across Canada of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Personally, I'm honored to raise three descendants of Canada's First People and also acknowledge that they come from Treaties 10 and 2, the Denisoonee and Anishinaabe. And through this acknowledgement, I am very humbled to have them call me mom and try to do my best to parent and reflect and seek out education to ensure they know and appreciate their nations and appreciate the need for a better future through truth and reconciliation. So I am really excited to introduce our first presenter, Vanessa Jolly. Vanessa is a fourth-year student in the School and Clinical Child Psychology PhD program at the University of Alberta under the supervision of Dr. Jacqueline Pye. Vanessa contributes to Towards Healthy Outcome framework under Jackie Pye's supervision. Vanessa also has experience on several research projects related to FASD, including self-regulation, employment, and housing. Vanessa is dedicated to research and collaborations that focus on improving the intervention practices delivered to individuals with FASD. Her dissertation research focuses on the identity development experiences of individuals with FASD. Sorry. Our second presenter is Twyla Harris Olson. Twyla is the manager of FASD and Disability Initiatives for the Government of Alberta. She has worked for the Government of Alberta for the past 10 years with the Disability Services Division of the Ministry of Senior, Community, and Social Services. Her experience within government includes working in several service delivery and policy areas responsible for persons with developmental disabilities, family supports for children with disabilities, the Alberta Brain Injury Initiative, community access for persons in continuing care, specialized services for individuals with disabilities, and Alberta's service dog initiatives. So thank you both for coming. And our first presenter, Vanessa, will load up her slides.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're located. My name is Vanessa, and as has been said, I'm a PhD student at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. I'm very excited to be here talking with all of you today about something that I'm particularly passionate about, which is the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework and the updates we've made to it to further support and inform the ways in which it can be used for integrated community support. Before I get started, I'd also like to do a land acknowledgement. The U of A is located on Treaty 6 territory, and my home is also located on Treaty 6, which is a traditional gathering place for many diverse Indigenous peoples, and I'm so very grateful and fortunate to be able to live and work on Treaty 6 and value the contributions the Indigenous peoples have made in my life across all areas, and particularly in my work. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the great minds I get to work with regularly in my lab group. This is a mostly complete list. I hope I didn't miss anybody, but they have helped contribute to this work as well. And the Towards Healthy Outcomes team, including my co-authors, Kathleen Kennedy, Jackie Pye, Katie Flanagan, as well as Audrey, Sarah, Bibi, Madison Geese, Farhan, Asif, and Maeve Crana. I would also like to take a moment to thank the individuals and families with individuals with FASD and their families who have been so generous with the time and expertise they've shared with us. They have inspired all of this work. Community members, frontline service providers, and educators whose courage to try new things creates windows of opportunity and to work towards healthy outcomes, and the many others who have sought healthy outcomes. Their support has been critical in not only the initial development of towards healthy outcomes, but in the ongoing feedback and updating that we were able to do the past couple of years. Before I get started, I just want to quickly go over why a framework. What is the purpose of this framework? And really, the purpose of Towards Healthy Outcomes is to establish a shared language, philosophy, and understanding among support networks, among individuals with FASD, their families, supportive others, community organizations, support networks across the board, so that everybody's coming from a similar place. In doing so, it aims to increase the consistency and intentionality within the work that we're doing to support people with FASD. And it also aims to streamline the links between research and practice. We really want to make sure that we're getting research into the hands of people who are directly impacted by it so that they can use it and it can add value to their own lives and their practice. And finally, THO creates opportunities for collaboration, for communication, and for mutual understanding and respect across support networks. So how did we get here? So beginning in about 2016, Jackie and a few other researchers got together and came up with this need for some sort of framework. And so they got together and looked at literature, what exists, what is needed, and where are there gaps. And then going through all of that, they identified some themes and working with community through consultation and collaboration, came up with some important developmental considerations that people with FASD and their families in particular find particularly relevant and important in the work that they're doing. Based on all of that communication, collaboration, and research, the initial Towards Healthy Outcomes framework launched in 2018. Since that time, there's been quite a few advances in the field of FASD research, big developments, along with ongoing feedback and really great engagement from the community at large. So people with FASD and the FASD community more broadly have been so wonderful to provide us with their experiences working with THO, their perspectives, and what worked for them and what didn't. And over time, we realized that this feedback was really changing the way we thought of the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework, and that led us to launch the updated framework this past January. So here is the updated Towards Healthy Outcomes framework, the visual representation of it. So as you can see here, there are now 10 domains instead of the previous 12. This was largely in response to some community feedback and some of the difficulties we had ourselves when trying to parse out and discuss certain domains separately from one another. So for example, previously we had family cohesion and attachment as separate domains, but in working with the Towards Healthy Outcomes and working with families, it's very difficult to talk about attachment without talking about family and vice versa. And so we combined those two domains to form the attachment and relationships domains that you can see in the bottom right corner of the visual there. Similarly, we combined the previous domains of adaptive functioning and community engagement to form an interdependence domain. I'm going to go into these domains a little bit more in depth in a moment, but generally speaking, those are the biggest changes that you can see here in the visual. You can see that we've maintained the I'll actually go to the next slide for that. The interactive systems, developmental lifespan perspective, and strengths-based and empowered perspective that are underlying and fundamental to the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework. And that is still captured within our visual as well, with the domains adding to each other and continuing to impact development of the individual at the center of the framework across the lifespan. And in terms of what has been updated, so as I mentioned, we've combined the domains. We've also updated the language, and we've created a little bit more structure within each of the THO domains to help with accessing information as well as following the storyline we're trying to set with it. caregivers acknowledged that they were using language that reflected opportunities for growth beyond simply surviving towards more of a thriving perspective. And so we wanted to shift our language in THO to really keep up with them. And so the language further emphasizes the strengths-based, empowered, and goal-oriented philosophies of THO. And I will go more in depth about the structure here in a moment as well. But just speaking to the language specifically, we renamed many of the domains to highlight that ongoing, thriving, strengths-based perspective alongside developmental impacts of each domain to highlight the lifelong impact of each domain. So for example, the physical health domain, as it was called in the original Towards Healthy Outcomes, is now renamed to physical well-being. And this is really meant to highlight that we are seeking to not only support physical health, we're aiming for overall physical well-being. We want to see people thrive. We also want to note that we talk about physical well-being first because beginning in infancy, its early onset and impact continues throughout the lifespan, beginning very early in life. Physical well-being underlines all other areas of functioning as well. If you're sick, it's really hard to want to do much else. So adjusting the domain to physical well-being emphasizes quality of life and the ongoing nature of physical well-being throughout the lifespan. Similarly, we renamed mental health and regulation to mental wellness, again, shifting towards that focus on well-being, success, and lifelong impacts. And in the previous iteration, social skills, we shifted the name to social competency because we are moving beyond that baseline of just skill, but rather we want to develop or foster a sense of social competency and a sense of ability in this area beyond just having some social skills. I didn't include it on here space-wise, but the education domain was also renamed to education and skill building to highlight the inclusion of non-academic pathways towards success, alongside the important role that school plays in not only academic trajectories, but helping to inform the skills and abilities kids develop that are necessary in later domains like interdependence, employment, housing, those sorts of things. So we also created a bit of a structure within the THO. So what we've done is basically broken up each domain into 3 sections. So the first section is a learning section, and it's meant to be a little bit more general information that goes over the developmental domain broadly. So just talking about physical well-being, what that looks like, talking about mental wellness, what that includes. Then following that brief introductory learning section, we go into an adapting section where we are taking that information and adapting it for FASD populations. And then the final section is applying current FASD informed tools to support people with FASD across the lifespan. So that is really the applied section of each domain and really is meant to be a clear direction towards or help direct people who are reading and using the THO to the sections that might be more relevant for them. And so in terms of combining the domains, the first, that was I guess you can say the new domain or the new combined domain is attachment and relationships. And this domain was created to really acknowledge that attachment experiences are central to relationships throughout the lifespan. It's really hard to separate attachment from relationships, and we are wired to connect with other people as part of our development. So using the word attachment to describe the outcomes and processes associated with early life bonding experiences has helped us to really be able to learn from children and individuals with FASD who experience those stable and reciprocal early relationships, as well as those who, early in life, as well as those who form them later in life, because that can inform healthy attachment at any stage. So children who experience stable and reciprocal early relationships tend to have secure attachments with their caregivers and consequently can explore and interact with the world around them with confidence. Other early life circumstances in which children might experience things like separation, loss, instability, or disrupted environments can impact that attachment relationship. But early attachment relationships, while they do impact underlying trust in other relationships, that can be informed as well by later relationships as well. And that's what we're really trying to get at within this domain, is that it's not just a static factor, is something that continues to evolve and impact us, and our relationships impact our attachment as well throughout the lifespan. So attachment experiences are a prime contributor to overall development, and that's why we have it so early on within the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework as well. As I previously stated as well, the interdependence domain was a combination of the adaptive functioning and community engagement domains from the original iteration of Towards Healthy Outcomes. And these domains were combined because we really want to highlight the impact that our abilities and skills have on the ways we interact with the community, and how our community interactions inform the way we develop those adaptive functioning abilities. Interdependence as a construct was introduced to us through work with community members and individuals with FASD, and caregivers of individuals with FASD as well. And interdependence refers to how we engage with other people and how we give and receive support. Interdependence exists along a spectrum, and it fluctuates across the lifespan and from situation to situation. We put the interdependence domain towards the transition to adulthood developmental period, because for people with FASD, when they're transitioning to adulthood, there's often a push for independence, but interdependence. In working with caregivers, we came to realize that interdependence offers a means of encouraging community engagement, contribution within their relationships, and reciprocity alongside ongoing supports. So there's really a big desire when we start to transition to adulthood for more autonomy, more choice, and this interdependence domain reflects how our unique areas of strength and need intersect with community engagement. So our adaptive abilities and strengths and needs vary from person to person. We all experience a wide range of systems and environments throughout our lives. And our adaptive skills and involvement in the community inform the level of interdependence that is needed. So for some people, interdependence looks like getting eyeglasses from the optometrist, like I have on here. For others, it looks like help with daily chores or decision-making. And where we fall along the interdependence spectrum is dynamic and evolving, and it fluctuates depending on a lot of different factors. So that is the two combined domains in a nutshell. I'm going to go through now a little bit of an example of each sections within THO, each domain. So I used some examples from the physical well-being domain to just demonstrate the structure of the Towards Healthy Outcomes domains. So this would be the learning section of the physical well-being domain. So the background is white in this section for all domains, and basically provides an introductory paragraph or few paragraphs about the elements of the domain. So it's a general explanation about what physical well-being is, how it is defined, and how to promote well-being in this domain broadly. There is no mention of FASD yet in this section. We are laying the groundwork about the domain itself. What it is, how do we see it in our day-to-day, and how does it impact functioning? This section is typically the shortest out of the three within each of the domains, and it's meant to make sure that everybody's on the same page about what that domain is in reference to specifically. Next is the adapt section of the domain. So you can see the color on this one is, the background color is a little bit darker. And this section is where we start to bring in that FASD focused information and that FASD informed lens. So within the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework, this section is always called FASD informed to make it very clear what it is that we're talking about. We begin to adapt the section by describing the ways in which FASD can impact functioning in this domain and the ways in which supports and strengths can be leveraged to support well-being. So depending on the domain, this section usually goes through about 3 specific aspects related to FASD and the ways in which it is related to the specific developmental domain. So in this domain, the physical well-being domain, we are echoing the sentiment of understanding FASD as a whole body diagnosis. And we also include pop-ups in this section related to open access articles and upcoming research initiatives to really make it accessible for folks. And then here we have the applying section of this domain. It's always titled moving together across the domains as well. And as you can see with this one, the background is a slightly darker color as well, really trying to denote the difference between each section, where they begin and end. And it is called moving together. So this is the FASD informed intervention and resource focused section of each domain. So in the physical well-being domain, we go through several aspects of physical health interventions, beginning with medication. We provide links to resources throughout this section and highlight potential interventions for consideration. The amount of interventions available varies a bit by domain. Some domains have a lot more information than others. But generally, there are at least 2 areas of intervention in each domain, just depending on what's available right now within the research. So that is, in a nutshell, the major changes to the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework. Thank you all so much for coming and listening and letting me share with you. If you have any further questions or want to discuss anything more in depth outside of today, my email is available there, as well as Jackie's. And I'd like to, again, thank my co-authors as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was super informative and helpful. And I encourage everybody to check out the link in the chat to the framework itself. Next up, we have Twyla.
Thanks, Melissa. Just as I get ready to share my slides, I too want to just stop and do a small land acknowledgement. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta, and on Treaty 6 territory, where we live, work, and play, and really want to acknowledge the connection of where we live to what we do. So, as everybody knows, it's still winter here, despite it being talked about being spring, and it's a good time to stop and appreciate the beauty of all of the things that winter can bring us, despite some of the inconvenience. So I do want to share some slides and start to talk a little bit about how policy interacts with the framework. I do want to point out that really I want to start to have a conversation, because to me, one of the biggest strengths of the framework itself is around our ability to use it to stimulate conversation, start to think about what it really means to implement the framework within our policy context, and to bring that out and about. Now I'm just fiddling with my screens for a second here as I try to figure out where my notes went on my screen. So as we think about that, and we really talk about what does it mean for policy, I kind of want to put it in the context of Alberta, where I'm from. And really, in Alberta, we have a system that focuses on our network delivery, and the overall policy that's produced and laid out helps to support our FASD service networks, which provide programming that are tailored to the communities that they serve across services and supports organized by 5 pillars. And so those pillars are up here. And really, it is all about how we put those together. And when I start to think about policy in the context of what we do in our policy, it's really about our vision for what it is we want here. And that's really about prevention and awareness, and preventing future alcohol exposed births. And then to provide individuals with FASD and their families and caregivers a comprehensive set of supports across their lifetime that really helps them to reach their full potential. And so when you are thinking about the framework and how it interacts with that. And, as I was listening to Vanessa, it's really interesting how the setup of that and the domains have really started to stimulate thought as we think about how does this apply to us. So the framework itself provides a clear outline of the necessary elements and the indicators that we have in there for effective programming, and thinking about how to establish a continuum of supports and services across the grouping for both individuals with FASD, their families, and caregivers. And that context, as I think about it in our policies, particularly in Alberta, really helps drive me to a focus on comprehensiveness. And so when I was first reading the framework and looking at the changes that have happened in 2.0, it was really about how do we determine and derive a comprehensive set of services. And the framework itself, and it's set up with the domains, helps us to think, and certainly helps me to think about how we do that, and how elements of a comprehensive set of services and a comprehensive response and effective supports can really look at changes in our delivery areas. So, I wouldn't expect that the services and supports based on community that come in for FASD that are specific to an urban center would be the same as a rural center. And really that's about the environment in which they're delivered and what else is there. And so the framework really helps us to do that. So from a policy lens, thinking about how we can look at determining if we have a comprehensive set of services and supports, determining if we've hit all the essential elements. So each of the domains, and how can that help us across the lifespan to really think about what is it that's being delivered across that time period. And so when we think about the framework and how do we fit there, to me, that was one of the big pieces as a policy piece, is to look at those elements. Are they all present? Are they present across all of our systems? And how do they interact at each stage of the lifespan? And so I know it sounds kind of superficial when I was listening to Vanessa, and I think, are there specific examples? And there are, but really, I think one of the biggest pieces when we start to talk about the context and policy is to think about how it fits from a very high level. What is it that we are doing with the framework to shape how our policy lays out? And particularly within our context and our pillars that we use here in Alberta, it's really about have we made sure that we have that comprehensiveness across the board. And when we think about supports for individuals and caregivers and our learning organization pieces, how we really ensure that it crosses the domains and that we're using that common language and framework to get the right mix of services and supports. And to use that in a way that allows us to be confident that our policy is promoting a comprehensive response, as well as looking at the pieces that really tie to the evidence-based services. So from a policy lens, how do we ensure that that's there? And that's part of the evaluation when you think about policy or a funding structure that can really look at things. So what is it that we want to provide? What should we provide? And how do we ensure that we're evaluating based on that? So the roadmap that the framework provides really allows us to look at how to build and evaluate that continuum of supports and services, and to meet the needs of individuals and their support systems throughout their lifespan. Because as we move through time, things change. Now, apparently I can't work my screen very well today. I want to make sure I've hit all my points before I move on. And so what we're really talking about is identifying and promoting that gradual and consistent movement to healthy outcomes. So I want to talk a little bit about supports and services next, and how that really helps us move through the journey with strong policy. And how do we make sure it has evidence-based supports and services? So when I think about our supports and services and what can that really mean? So to me, the framework is probably one of the better structures I've seen to help policy think about, do we really have a comprehensive set? So when I think about how to implement it at a very high level, do we have supports and services available that cross all of the domains? How do we bring them together and allow them to collaborate with our other systems and supports that will help us to do that? But also, how do we drive that down to a service and support level? So as we look across delivery, it's not always the same viewpoint. And at the end, maybe Vanessa can join in and really talk a little bit around when you think about the different pieces and apps and implementing services and supports related to a domain. Is it more important that it focuses on a domain? Is it more important that it interacts across a lifespan with the other domains? And so really, when we start to think about this, having the right services for a youth or an adult, and how do we do that across a lifespan, making sure that it's really meeting the needs in each domain area, so that comprehensiveness as well as lifespan services, and looking to the framework to help provide that structure for our delivery mechanisms as we think about the services and supports areas. So it's not, to me, what's important here is it's not necessarily prescriptive and defining what programs and services should be provided, but rather pointing to the domain areas or the outcome area, and how do we best get those elements moved in there. And from a policy lens, really looking at how do we evaluate that we've done that. One of the pieces that I think is important in this framework and how to implement it is for a focus from a policy lens really around that evidence-based supports and services. And so how do we make sure that that's there? So when I think about the structure of the framework and how to implement it, and really thinking, as Vanessa was pointing out, what does it mean to be an FASD informed version of that? What does the research tell us? I think that that's really helpful when we drive down to supports and services, and what can that really mean, and that review. So looking not just at developing that comprehensive viewpoint, but also how to evaluate and make sure we have it as we move through. So you might have noticed that I've said the word comprehensive a number of times. And to me, that's an important feature when we're thinking about policy. And how do we assure that? So I've heard that a lot in our policy documents, and I read it a lot, and we talk about, we provide comprehensive supports and services. Through the domain areas, we really have, in my viewpoint, a strong structure to evaluate that, to really look at it and to get focused on what does that mean, not to be prescriptive, but to allow us to develop supports and services that cross those domains from a policy perspective, and really ensure that we have the right mix of supports and services, rather than prescribing just a single service or looking at, oh, that's a wonderful idea for how we should deliver a service, versus how does it fit in the mix, and making sure that we have supports and services for all areas of life and the different lifestyle stages. So I know I was certainly talking with some of our networks, and we were talking a bit about planning and how do you incorporate planning into what it is you're thinking about in terms of the framework and towards healthy outcomes. And when I think about it, I think about, are there services and supports available from each domain area? How do those services and supports relate back to the particular evidence-based approaches, and the look at the different brain domains, and how are we making sure that we are in line with promoting strengths and not just providing an intervention to look at a deficit or to reduce a deficit, but really looking at how do we get that overall outcome. When I was talking to some of the service networks, they were talking to me about how do they plan for a service and do individual supports and services that incorporate all domains. And are they thinking about that at each stage of the lifespan delivery? So when you're thinking about delivery with a young person, are you thinking about education and skill building? Are you thinking about relationships and interdependence? Way back during those childhood interventions, and how do you lead those things together and really get focused on strengths and allowing a targeted support to get focused for that individual within the context of the greater perspective, so that really we're focused on outcomes and not mitigating a particular issue, which is something that can often happen from a policy perspective, where we say things like individuals should be supported so they don't access multi-systems of support or become strong users of the health system or strong users of a particular support system, rather than talking about how do we build on an individual's strengths to connect them to their own support system in their community and allow all the domains to work together. So it's really having that look at targeted supports. And the framework really draws, my thoughts when I think about that, and I think about how to incorporate it into policy to ensure that we're hitting all of the domains and that we're really allowing an individual to be the center of their own system and supports and how they access it, but allowing the environment around them to have a strong set of supports that can attach when needed and can really focus on magnifying their strengths. So that roadmap kind of approach, and striving to ensure that we have intervention planning that looks across all of the domains at each stage, even though from a high policy perspective, and to go back to my initial statements around looking for that comprehensive supports, does every service or every area, every individual have access to supports and services from every domain area, and how do we integrate those, as well as looking at what's needed at that time and how to focus it to an individual. It's interesting to think about the framework from the different perspectives and really allow it to guide our policy and planning in terms of how do we design policy to ensure that we have a wide range of services? How do we do evaluation to make sure that each service is based on good evidence-based policy and focuses on that outcome versus mitigating a particular behavior or individual piece? And so hopefully, that sort of starts to guide some of the thoughts we were having around how to implement this into our policies.
Thank you both for your wonderful presentations. And a big thank you to our presenters today. I would like to thank each of you for joining us today and hope you join us in future webinars. To get more information on CanFASD and to stay in the know with respect to all upcoming webinars, please check out the website at www.canfasd.ca or follow the social media channels to find more resources. And thank you both. It was an amazing presentation, and I loved the comparison between, the framework and policy plans. So much appreciated.